Hello and welcome to the Business of Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Eric Rosenberg. Over the years, I've had the privilege of helping businesses in the meetings and event industry grow and succeed. And I'm excited to share that experience with you. If you feel alone and overwhelmed, and if you're looking to take your business to the next level, improve your strategy and sales, and connect with like-minded professionals, you are in the right place. I invite you to visit eventbusinessformula.com and join our community of event business owners dedicated to exponential growth. Now let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. And today we are crossing the Atlantic Ocean to speak with an amazing entrepreneur, somebody who has been in business for over 20 years, somebody who chaired the global board of EO Entrepreneurs Organization. But the reason we're speaking with him this morning is because he has an upcoming book titled Make Boards Work, is an author. And I'm delighted to speak with the one and only Marc Stockli. Normally in Switzerland, we call it Marc Stockli, but nobody would understand. So Marc Stockli, Marc, good morning, and so happy to speak with you today.
Same here. Thank you, Eric. I'm very impressed by your Swiss pronunciation. You could actually get a red passport very soon.
Well, that's very kind, but I have to tell you that I actually had clients in Switzerland, and between the French-speaking Swiss, the Italian-speaking Swiss, and the Swiss-German Swiss, that was something interesting culturally speaking. But even if I understand a bit of German, Swiss-German is a language in itself, right?
Very true. Very true. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So, Marc, tell us a little bit about your journey first. You've been in cybersecurity, you've been an entrepreneur, and obviously, when I say we cross the Atlantic Ocean, you've been working and living everywhere in the world. So, how does that happen?
Sure. So born and raised in Switzerland, I have a law degree from a Swiss university. I also have an MBA from the Wharton School. So I spent a few years studying and working in the United States. Worked for a while on the corporate finance investment banking side in Hong Kong, in Tokyo, in London, and New York. Then switched into strategy consulting. So initially a bit of a corporate career. I worked with BCG out of Zurich, Switzerland, but did all my work in Asia. So with Asian clients or Asia divisions of European financial services firms, and then became an entrepreneur. About a year before partner promotion at BCG, I thought I had written enough PowerPoint slides and thought, let's do something serious. Let's do something real and honest and roll up the sleeves and become an entrepreneur and really build something and not just paint PowerPoint. And co-founded a cybersecurity company, as you alluded, led it for about 7 years. And then as co-founder, and then stepped out operationally. One of my co-founders took on the role of CEO, and I went out operationally and still served on the board of the company. We sold the business end of 2021.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So take us back, if you don't mind, at the moment you decide to leave corporate world. And yes. I'm sure you had well-thought or well-meaning people in your family or friends telling you, are you totally crazy and you're about to be promoted and why are you doing this?
Not only my many friends and family thought I was crazy, I at times thought I was crazy too, because when I switched from BCG to being an entrepreneur, I said it in jest, but it was really quite true that in my new role, I earn less than I used to pay in taxes, which is not a good move, right? So yes, indeed, quite crazy. But I enjoyed consulting. I stayed longer than I thought. I thought I would typically, you do it for 2-3 years. You learn the tips and tricks, and you learn a lot as a strategy consulting, and then doors are open, right? And I stayed longer because I enjoyed the ride. I worked with great clients, but there was this urge, right? There was this urge to do something different. As I said a little bit, you do have impact as a consultant. Hopefully you do. And I felt I mostly had, but it is not direct, right? It is indirect. And I had this urge. I looked at, I had one offer from a client that was very attractive at the time, but it felt like a one-way street. It felt like if I go there, it's golden handcuffs, again, very high salary. if I do that, it will be very difficult to move out again. So I had one possibility to go into venture capital at the time. That was just in the early 2000s, the dot-com bubble, and then also the burst. Venture capital was a hot thing and in Europe quite new. There was a setup by Bernard Arnault of Louis Vuitton at the time. And then I really decided what I considered to go all the way, like all in really true entrepreneurship. VC seemed a bit like half entrepreneur, half consultant. And I thought, okay, let's go all in. I had an idea the initial idea was secure email. So protecting the confidentiality of emails. And almost by luck, basically, I was in touch, who then became my CTO, the technical brain behind the product. So, and that just was a perfect match. And we started doing it.
Because today, 2025, you talk about cybersecurity. It's almost like, yeah, sure, everybody knows what it is. But 20 years ago, wow.
Yes and no, right? Cybersecurity in itself, a vast field, right? There's so many different variations under the cybersecurity umbrella. But you're onto something. We were probably a few years early. Our first years were tough. We looked every once in a while, we did look at external funding. Partially, we were not successful, especially after the dot-com bubble burst. VC funding was very scarce and very difficult. At times, we decided against it, but we really ended up bootstrapping all the way. We never had external funding. So we also grew a bit, not the typical software tech play where, you grow scale like crazy from the very start with many funding rounds. It was a bit more the conservative business building, step-by-step approach. But secure email, possibly we were a few years early, but then again, as a newcomer, you cannot be late, right? Otherwise, it's the bigger guys who capture the market. The funny thing is, we later did other security aspects. Our area was always securing the confidentiality of data in motion. Data that is being transmitted. But secure email was the first product. It's still the most important product in our portfolio. Now we're in a bigger setup with our buyer. But email has been proclaimed dead many times, right? I don't know how many publications there are, end of email and thing. Well, it's still pretty important, right? I don't know how many emails you write and receive every day, but it's not being completely replaced by WhatsApp or Signal or Slack or anything. It's still alive and bustling, and so is our product. The people have become much more aware of privacy, of confidentiality. Initially, we were very much focusing on very specific, niches, industries that hold confidentiality very dearly, like, say, banking, private banking, wealth management, or legal law firms. It's very big in healthcare. It's very big in government. It's very big in industry. Any industry that has a decent R&D component is very conscious of these elements. So our product portfolio, our client spectrum is very broad by now.
Yeah, and it's not ending at all. I've heard horror stories of fake email or the people that have the data, and then you're going to transfer a big amount of money. They change just one letter in the email. You don't pay attention. And now I'm here as well. I can record your voice and then pretend that I'm you, and then say, please wire. This is insane.
It's an arms race, right? It's like any other type of security. There's team offense, the bad guys. There's team defense. That's us, corporates and private who are concerned about their privacy and security and vulnerabilities. And it's a race. And AI is a big driver now, of course. But again, AI can be used on the nasty side and on the protective side. And it's as you say, when you are aware what is possible, it's a scary world. It really is. I'm happy to not be too influential because, if you're below the radar is the safer thing as being very exposed.
That's a very good point. Yeah. And in general, you can do much more by being under the radar. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. You started your business 20 years ago. Did you know about EO Entrepreneurs Organization when you started it, or how did that happen?
Not when I started. I was approached around 2003 or 4 by EO Zurich, who were in kind of my neighborhood in Switzerland, and initially did not join. I attended 2 events and I liked it a lot. I liked the people. I was impressed. It seemed very insightful, very really powerful, but it was exactly time where I felt I did not have the time to do something else. In hindsight, I now know that's exactly the time I should have joined, but I didn't get it at the time. So a kind soul, a few years later, 2008, somehow looked at old prospects and called me again and says, well, Marc, you were with us a few times 4 or 5 years back, what happened? And I told him, look, I liked it. I didn't have the guts. I didn't have the bandwidth I felt to join. Let's give it one more try. But this time we'll do it once. And at the end of the day, we'll decide. And there I signed signed, not legally, but I confirmed, committed, and I haven't looked back. I've been from the very start, I've been not just a member, but I've been very, very active from the very start.
Zurich, you're saying this, and I remember having meetings at the Lac, which is a beautiful place.
It is. Yes, it is. It's a very classy place. Yes.
You joined EO, and then fast forward, then you became global chair.
Yes. So it took a while. It's not something you do overnight. I served in different chapter roles. For my local chapter, was chapter president. Then was asked, as is often the case. Sometimes we say asked, sometimes we say voluntold, right, to serve in a global subgroup. That then time global chair Bubu Andres from the Philippines asked me to lead a global team on the strategic alliances, the sponsoring side, kind of out of nowhere. She just kind of had trust in me, and again, hard to say no. And that basically led then to me applying for the global board and later being elected as global chairman. Yes.
That's awesome. You started your own business. You were obviously in corporate. You were in global board of EO. And rightly so, you said the first time you were approached, you didn't see the value. I was lucky enough when I was president of ISEC, the student organization, to have a board of advisors because the structure is like that. And when I start my first business, and that's what I say to anyone, whether you're a solopreneur or you're having a large firm, you need to surround yourself with people going to tell you exactly what they think, not what you want to hear, but going to do it in a great environment where you can ask all the questions, where you can get naked in front of them, virtually speaking, of course. But the point is, you should surround yourself with people going to help you, and because alone you can do nothing. So today, I'd love to talk about the book you're writing, Make Boards Work, that is going to be published this year. First of all, what triggered the idea of writing that book? And then second of all, what are you focusing on that people, whether they're a large firm or a small firm, can benefit from?
Fantastic. Thank you. Maybe I take one step back quickly, because what you said in the EO context of sometimes we say it's lonely at the top, not meant hierarchically, but it's lonely as an entrepreneur, right? As an entrepreneur, my highs are very high and my lows are very low. And oftentimes I can hardly talk about my highs and I hardly talk about my lows, right? The highs, they look arrogant and they provoke envy by possibly others. And the lows, I have to be a knight in shining armor as an entrepreneur. I cannot say to the outside, my life sucks. It's not good. My business is in trouble. I cannot tell that hardly to anybody, right? And that's really the raison d'etre. That's really the reason why EO was founded. That's really the core of the essence of EO and what we do as EO members in sharing our experiences, exactly to be that open and talk openly about our successes and about our failures, our struggles in a very safe, in a very confidential, in a very vulnerable environment. And that is a beautiful analogy to also what a board should be. Hardly ever is, or at least very rarely is, but should be, right? So the starting point, I've been fascinated by boards and how boards operate for a very long time. I have started taking notes in every single board meeting 9 years ago. I have several hundred board meetings, some as member, some as board chair. And I always take notes. That's on the meeting, right? The content. But I've also, from the very start on the board meetings, taken notes at the meta level. Kind of what works well in this board, what doesn't work well, and why. So this topic has been in my head for a very long time. And then it has really been amplified by my experience on the EO Global Board. And that really made me decide to spend a good part of 2024 writing this book. And the context is twofold. One is, if I ask in my EO environment with talking to founders and family business owners, but also VCs, also private equity investors, how happy they are with their own boards or their portfolio boards, the numbers are very bad, right? Very few people are happy with their boards. Most of us have to have a board. It's the business has a certain size, or possibly with investors in there. And most of the time it's treated as a necessity and quite often as more like a nuisance, right? As an annoying necessity.
Compliance.
Yeah, we have to do it, right? But and it's control and it's nasty and it's I need to write this report and the investors it's not just the founders, right? It's also the other side. They say, oh no, not another board meeting with these guys. And it's not a healthy relationship. It's not a healthy attitude. At the same time, this lonely element as a founder or as a family business, second, third generation owner, right? This loneliness, why not use this body that we have anyway to really get it to a level where I have an additional sparring partner? You talked about this environment, right? That to have a group of people, why not have the board serve their purpose? Yes, sometimes contrary to the EO form, there is some agenda, right? An investor has certain direction and certain pressure from their investors and all that. Yes, it's not exactly the same. There is an agenda in there. There sometimes are conflicts of interest. It cannot be as safe as what we know from EO form. But why not aspire for it to be that body where you can talk openly, where it's not about being right, but about getting it right, to be challenged, to be supported, to really have an additional chamber of sounding, of sparring to get to better decisions. And that's really the aspiration for writing the book, to find ways or frameworks or tools to elevate the level a board operates.
Awesome. As an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a small business owner, you don't have to have a board. It's not
correct. Yes.
Legally speaking, compliance.
Correct. Yes.
And I think we both agree the value of having a board of advisors, but whatever you call it, is amazing. How do you build that board?
For one, yes, you're absolutely right. As a small business owner with no investors, there is no legal or kind of governance obligation to have a board. I think one of my learnings is really rather start sooner than later with building a board, because maybe if I grow and reach a certain size, depending on the jurisdiction, right? There's certain limits. Sometimes it's size in terms of number of employees. It could be a threshold of capitalization. It could be threshold of revenue, where legally you're obligated to have a board. So hardly any team starts immediately by being high performant, right? Usually you need some warm-up time. So that's one reason why I advocate to rather build a board sooner than later, rather do it before you have to. In the cases in small business settings, yeah, you don't have to, but you could exactly build this environment of an advisory board. And I think one element is thinking very rigorously, what type of skills do we have in scarcity in my operational team, in myself and my leadership team, but that are relevant to the success of our business. And think of that also in phases. What I need today might not be the same as what I need in 2 years' time. It might not be the same what I need in 5 years' time. So I think it's really the starting point is a very rigorous thinking of what skills are of true benefit to me and to us as a company for the next 1 to 2 years as the first thing. Two, I think one very important criteria is simply willingness to spend time. This is not something that is done by meeting once a quarter. That's the typical board rhythm especially for larger companies. I think especially in smaller businesses that are very dynamic, operating maybe in strong growth phases, but also in dynamic market environments, the puzzle moves so quickly. There's so much changing in such a company. The rhythm probably is higher, and there's also a need to have kind of informal information flow in between. I always say
you don't have to meet with everyone. No, but you can tap into one or two.
Pick up the phone and call the chief product officer and, what's going on? How's it going? How did this work? For example, I make it a rule that I spend days on site of all the companies where I serve on the board. I try to aim to have 1 or 2 days a month on the companies where I chair their boards, just to be in the office, to feel the vibe, to be able to bump into people, water cooler discussions, and really get additional flavor of what's going on, really. Not just what's in the report, but really what's happening. How does it feel?
That's very interesting. And then really being on the ground and seeing what's happening. I like that. When you are looking at people that you've put in your board in the past, and I'm not talking about EO organization, but in your business.
Yes.
Are you looking to have people who can bring you business? Or are you looking at people that will tell you exactly what they think that could impact your business?
Yeah. So the predecessor to my cybersecurity company was very short-lived, was also technology, also software, had some human overlap, but failed about 2 years into the business. And in that company, we got external funding that I brought in. We also built the board, and we built a pretty high-powered board, pretty big names at least in my kind of in the Swiss economy. So it was mainly built exactly along the lines that you say, kind of, opening doors, bringing in business, having access to investors, having access to large customers, pulling strings and all that. That board proved largely ineffective, right? That I'm not saying this can never work, but I think it's very naive and dangerous to think that anybody on the board can really pull in significant part of your top line. That needs to be in the operational team. No board member is going to be your chief revenue officer or your chief sales officer. That is a 24/7 job. That is not a board detached once a month or whatever the rhythm is role. It's just not going to work. Of course, sometimes board members can open doors and make an introduction on be that on the talent side, be that on the customer side, be that on the supplier side, be that on the investor side. Yes, absolutely. But it's not something to rely on. So I think a huge filter is real skills and really willingness to contribute, willingness and contribute. I think the biggest one is not the door opening. That's a nice addition. But I think it's really being a sparring partner to the business to lead to better decisions. My shortest definition of the role of a board is support and challenge. A board needs to support the CEO and her or his executive team and also to challenge them. I think that's the core role.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I really love it. The amount of people that are available for boards varies. There are people that obviously their experience varies. How do you compensate your board members? And I know it's different if you are a VC or if you are a small business.
Yes. So, I mean, if you're venture backed, typically the fund that leads the round most likely will insist on a board seat, and obviously they will not be compensated. They're basically compensated by their investors, right? But they will insist on being a board. So typically in a funded business, in a venture backed or private equity backed business, you cannot select your board completely, right? There's some investors will select a part of the board where you have influence. Yes, if one of my old mentors, the scion of a very large family business, was told, Mark, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So if you have somebody really good and you want them to contribute, that has a price. Typically, people will not do that out of goodwill. In a small company setting, cash is scarce, right? So quite typically, they might be compensated on the equity side, long equity or only equity. One option is to do that in a regular stock option plan that also the regular employees are bound into. There are some benchmarks. It depends on where the businesses already are. Is kind of in terms of its life cycle, it could be 0.25% per year with regular 4-year vesting, maybe 1-year cliff, etc. Or it could be a bit more if it's a very early stage business, somewhere along those lines. But there's some benchmarks that can be looked up on what the typical compensation ratio is. But in small businesses, very often it's low or no cash and some equity upside.
And I've never heard anything and everything from a few % up to 3% for an owner to put aside to compensate advisors, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah, that's probably a good, again, depends on how early you start. Yes.
What is the ideal term for a board member?
I think that's one of the areas where I go a little bit provocative. Traditionally, board members are typically kind of engaged for the long term. The whole search industry, executive search industry that does that for a living, when a tenure is too short, they even recompensate and pay the money back from their fees. I think, again, in our world, in the startup and scale-up world, it's too dynamic. The same person might be perfect now, might be completely irrelevant 2 years from now. So I think in such an environment, the right term is 1 to 2 years. And yes, it can be extended, right? It can be renewed, but I think there should be a natural break. Is this still the right person? Is this still the right set of skills that we need? I had the privilege to work with the board and the 2 founders of Northvolt. Northvolt used to be Europe's best funded company. They got about 15 billion of funding. It's a clean tech battery company founded by 2 Tesla alumni out of Sweden. They went bankrupt, or they filed for bankruptcy earlier in the year, but they were very strategic about their board. When they started Northvolt, they said our first phase is a fundraising board, because they knew to build plants where you produce batteries is a huge capital expenditure. They knew that they would need billions of funding. So they had people from Goldman Sachs on the board that had the Rolodex of knowing every sovereign wealth fund and every corporate and every institutional investor on speed dial, and they knew they would help them get the funding. The second board they had was industrialization. They knew they had to, once they had plans, they need to build to really scale production, real technology, real industrial scaling. So they got kind of industry veterans in. And the third board was meant to lead them to IPO. They were cut short. There's different reasons for that, but they had exactly that thinking that a board seat is not for eternity, but is a specific skill and contribution for a specific time.
Very interesting. So when you look at small business, obviously that's a different aspect. You cannot have necessarily prepare for boards every month
Yes.
or something like that. You're looking at what is the ideal size and number of people for a board to be very effective?
Yes, I would say 3 to 5, definitely not larger. Maybe start with 3 people, the founder, CEO. Sometimes there's co-founders, and one external or 2 external people. If you have investors, again, typically with a funding round, somebody new comes on board. That should not add on indefinitely. If you're by your C round and every time pre-seed, seed, A round, you always add one. At some point, you're still a not super large company. You have a board of 9. That's crazy. That's just not efficient, not effective. So I think the VC industry also needs to learn to syndicate and take a step back at some point, but that there's an industry shift over time. But I would definitely start small. I would not go beyond 3, 4, 5 for sure. Maybe 2 more things along that whole board constellation. One is, I think, us being entrepreneurs, it's very important to have at least one of the external board members also being an entrepreneur, because one thing the VCs, even if some of them are terrific and they're fantastic people, and they're also, they're not low costs and they're not nasty people. But unless they have been entrepreneurs themselves, they don't know and they have not experienced these huge highs and these big throws, these huge holes we fall into in the lows. So that emotional roller coaster we go through as an entrepreneur, a fellow entrepreneur will understand and will empathize with it. But somebody who did strategy consulting or a corporate career will not get that, no matter how nice and pleasant personalities they are. So I think to have that backing, that sparring partner that really gets also that emotional volatility is very helpful. And the second element that I want to add, I think, is especially in venture-backed, where you have maybe 1 or 2 co-founders, then you have maybe 2 investors. It's super helpful to have one independent, like somebody who's really not kind of in a conflict of interest situation, ideally as chairman. I think to have an independent chair is a very powerful instrument to balance and create what I call psychological safety in the boardroom.
Very interesting. I'm smiling because I was thinking years ago for a listed British company, I had pleasure and honor of serving as a non-exec chair.
Okay.
But three times a year, I would be in a room with the chair of the chairman of the company, and that would be just him and me in one room, looking at the entire business for the entire day. I was exhausted at the end of the day, but intellectually speaking, strategically speaking, it was just phenomenal. One last thing I'd like to ask you, because let's have an experience here. My first corporate event agency, my first business, a corporate event agency in Belgium, I had an advisory board. So not formally board of directors, but I had an advisory board. And we were meeting twice a year, and I had between 7 and 10 people.
Yeah.
At each meeting, we were preparing that, getting their input and everything. I decided from the get-go that I will not chair that meeting. And so I had somebody external that was facilitating.
Yes.
What's your take on it?
I think you were very smart. I think that's a brilliant way to do it. Again, kind of would be, from a founder, CEO perspective, again, an argument in favor of having an independent chair. So they can really, were primarily the head of CEO and founder to really drive content, and have the chair, the independent chair, facilitate and run the meeting. So I think it's I think it's clearly best practice. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. What other best practice would you like to share now?
I just, I picked up on, you said, I cannot prepare for a board meeting every month. And I fully agree. I'm not going to disagree with that, right? At the same time, again, that preparation for the board meeting, I think, is oftentimes looked at the wrong way. it so often is looked at by the founder CEO as a chore, right? I need to write this report for the board. I need to prepare the board pack. I need to write this report and send it 4 days or whatever it is, 2 days or a week before the board meeting to the board. How about looking at it as a privilege, as a luxury for me, every whatever frequency it is, to step away, zoom out, take a step back, and really think for an hour or two, what's really important in our business? What's going well? What's not going well? Where am I proud of? What keeps me awake at night? Where would I like input? Where would I like support and challenge? A bit similar to our 5% reflection in form, right? To have that regularity to step away and say, what are the big things? And share that with the board. I think if we look at it that way, the board preparation becomes much less of a burden and really becomes a luxury and really leads to value.
Great points. Thank you. Marc, you're publishing this year, Make
Yes.
Boards Work. When we meet in 1 year with a bottle of champagne, what are we going to celebrate?
It will not be in a year, but my big aspiration, I'm very aware of that, is that this book becomes kind of the go-to reference for all of us board practitioners, right? Smaller business or bigger business owners, the investors, the VCs, the PEs, a CEO who wants to serve on a board, really the go-to book to say, okay, I don't want to just have a board. I want to have a really good board. I want to have a board that really, puts in its weight, pulls its weight, adds value to my business. So it won't be in a year, but if we can toast towards that, if there's like early steps towards that, then I'd be happy. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. How do people get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is a very simple one. I'm at Marc O. Stockli. I should be very easily searchable or foundable on LinkedIn. I think that would be a good one.
Wonderful. Marc, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day in Zurich, and I look forward to actually meeting you in person one day.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's true. It's quite special. It feels so familiar, so friendly, yet we haven't met in person. It's quite powerful, quite intriguing. Yes. Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Business of Meeting podcast. I hope you found today's episode valuable. If you enjoyed the show, the most important thing you can do is leave a review and share it with your colleagues. It really helps spread the word. I truly appreciate your support. And if you're ready to take your business to the next level, don't forget to visit eventbusinessformula.com to learn more about how we are helping even business owners like you. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.